It's Winabox weekend once again, which means that right now on Arena, if you can play Secrets of Strixhaven sealed well enough, then you have the opportunity to get boxes of play booster packs mailed to your house. This means that I once again have the solemn responsibility to walk you through the kinds of data that I have used to win boxes in tons of these events and give you the edge that you need to have the best chance possible of winning a box. Today I'm going to tell you 4 important things. First, I'm going to give a high-level overview on where the sealed format stands. Is there a color pair that's way on top of the others? Is there one that you should avoid? And especially since not that much time has passed since the last arenadirect, I'm going to focus in on what has shifted in sealed Secrets of Strixhaven since last time. One thing that's shifted a little is which commons are the most better in sealed compared to in draft, and which commons are the most worse in sealed compared to in draft. If you're a drafter, that's really important information to see because it shows you how you should adjust your expectations about which types of decks are good to play in sealed compared to what you're used to in draft. Now, spoiler alert, a bit of a through line is that Witherbloom or Golgari is suffering badly in this format. It is way on the bottom in sealed. So I thought it would be really useful to give you an archetype breakdown of what to do if you do end up in Golgari, because as we all know, sometimes in sealed, you just have to play what you open. Well, that's always true in sealed. And if you open a bunch of bombs that are pointing you towards Witherbloom, you might feel kind of stuck after seeing the slide deck and learning that Witherbloom is not the place that you want to be. So I want to give you some constructive advice. If you do end up in Witherbloom, what should you do? Now, it turns out I'm a bit of a Golgari specialist, and I have about 5 decks that have 1 boxes in an archetype that I'm calling Golgari Get There, because sometimes you can just get there, even if you're not in the best archetype and you don't have the best combination of cards. All right, as always, the data that I'm using come from 17lands.com. Thanks so much to 17lands. And one extremely useful piece of information that they provide is how often the different color combinations are winning. So here's your color pair power ranking in sealed Secrets of Strixhaven. On top, we have Silverquill, Orzhov, white-black, sitting at a 57% win rate. This is pretty much exactly the same as its win rate in draft. Number 2, Prismari, Izzet, blue-red at a 57% win rate. This one is substantially better, 3 percentage points better than its winning in draft. And number 3, Lorehold, Boros, white-red, 56% win rate, 1 percentage point lower than its winning in draft. This already is a big shift in the meta since the last arenadirect weekend. So basically last arenadirect, people started having a lot more success with Prismari. Maybe after people learned how to build Prismari better in draft, they took those skills over to sealed, and the improvement in people's Prismari win rates actually toppled Lorehold out of the number 2 slot. So Prismari and Lorehold have now flipped. If you're pairing red with another color, you'd now rather pair red with blue than pair red with white, all else equal. What has not changed is number 4, Quandrix Simic, blue-green, 55% win rate, the same as in draft, and number 5 on the bottom, Witherbloom, Golgari, green-black, 53% win rate, 1 percentage point worse than in draft, where it's also the lowest performing archetype. Well, give or take. It's near or tied for the bottom in draft. It's way on the bottom in sealed. I want to pause for a moment though and just kind of appreciate this. I mean, just from a game design perspective, among the top 2 archetypes, we now have 4 different colors. The top performing archetype is white-black. The second performing archetype is blue-red. This makes it a little harder to say, you know, if you want to be in any one color, you should be in this color. Last time, both of the top 2 archetypes shared white, so it was easy enough to say, you know, as a tiebreaker, maybe you want to lean white. We no longer have that kind of super simple single color heuristic, but that's actually kind of nice, right? That's probably a healthy game environment. It should be kind of liberating that whether your best color is white, black, blue, or red, there might be a top 2 archetype that you can lean into by pairing your best color with one of the colors basically other than green. So that's the heuristic that remains. Avoiding green still seems like maybe a pretty good idea. You might very well wonder how splashing affects all of this, because the green-based decks are leaning into the Converge archetype, which is one of the most, at least prominent, if not one of the best archetypes in draft. But basically, as a general rule, in this sealed format and in, I would say, basically every recent sealed format, every time you add in a color, the win rate goes down. This might be a correlation because people's pools being worse might encourage them to explore into a different color, right? But it could also be causal, that you're taking hits on your mana base and the amount of power sometimes just doesn't compensate for it on average. So your mileage may vary, but I do want to say, hey, that's kind of nice that there are 4 different colors represented among the top 2 archetypes. All right, what about the best commons? There are 2 reasons that I like to look at the best commons. Number 1 is commons have a lower individual power level than rares or mythics, and so the commons that are the best might be more reflective of what decks are the best. We're using examples of cards to get a richer sense of where the whole format is at. The other reason is you're much more likely to see these commons in your actual pool. So you will know that if you see them, they're kind of a pull into these respective colors. So here they are. Number 1 is Pursue the Past. This is kind of interesting because Lorehold is no longer the top archetype in sealed. And yet still Pursue the Past, the red, white, gain 2, discard a card, draw 2 with flashback, remains the best common. So it's not just being lifted up by the Lorehold win rate. Pursue the Past is just really, really strong in sealed. Super clean card advantage that also helps in racing situations. I think it makes sense. Number 2 is Rubble Rouser. Again, really interesting that this remains one of the best commons in sealed, even though Lorehold is not the best color pair. So it's not just about things leaving the graveyard synergies. It's probably just a card that gives you some card selection, has a little bit of, reaching damage, and also gums up the board. Number 3, Elite Interceptor, the 1/2 for 1 that taps a creature and draws a card. That card's just messed up. It makes sense. Number 4, we saw this last time actually, but Quick Study turns out to be really, really good in sealed. This probably is some of the glue that holds together the Prismari archetype in its ascension in this sealed format. A pure 2 for 1 in blue turns out to just be one of the best things that you can be doing at common level in this format. And then finally, number 5, Unsubtle Mockery. I think it makes sense that Unsubtle Mockery pops up here because it is a red removal spell that just fits into Lorehold and fits into Prismari, 2 of the, better archetypes, I guess. Lorehold is right in the middle, but it's removal and it's also card selection. These cards vary from about a 58 to 60% game in hand win rate. If you don't know what that means, I'm going to link in the description a video where I talk through how to interpret all of these data. One notable change since last time, this card Chase Inspiration, 1 blue for an instant, target creature you control gets +0/+3 and gains hexproof until end of turn. This card was one of the top performing commons in the last, after the Arenadirect before the last one. This last Arenadirect dethroned it. Personally, I find this kind of reassuring because when I was talking through it being really up there in the win rate data, I flagged that I was a little bit surprised, a little bewildered by it. It doesn't look that strong on paper. It does blank removal and protect your bombs and maybe cause something to survive a combat. That type of card, though, is usually not like one of the best things that you can be doing. And now it's no longer one of the best things you can be doing. It's slid down a few places, well outside of the top 5. Still a good card, but I want to flag that one came down to earth a little bit. All right, now before introducing the Golgari Get There deck, I want to talk a little bit about what's better in sealed and what's worse in sealed compared to in draft. The reason this is important is that sealed is its own format. So if you like to draft, but you haven't played that much sealed, you should be very wary of just importing over your card and deck evaluations from draft and assuming that the same evaluations obtain in sealed. All right, so here are the 5 commons that are the most better in sealed than they are in draft. And interestingly, they're all kind of Prismari. So number 1 is Stadium Title Mage, the 4/4 for 2, a blue and a red. When it enters or attacks, you can draw a card, and if you do, discard a card. In draft, this card is held back maybe by the archetype just not really having a role for it, but it is on paper a very powerful card. In sealed, that power shines through. It's a card that you kind of groan if you have to spend your removal on, but you kind of do actually have to spend your removal on it, because if you don't, it can totally just take over a game. Number 2, Page Loose Leaf, the 0/2 for 2 that taps to add a colorless, and you can discard another copy of it to find an instant or sorcery from your deck. not tutor, you just get the next one on top. A really bizarre card that challenges my card evaluation. It's pretty bad in draft, but actually pretty good in sealed. I guess because you can probably play a lower number of instants and sorceries, and you can be very confident that whenever you're discarding a page, the instant or sorcery you're going to find is going to be good. Probably usually you can put a removal spell in your deck, and then every second copy of page becomes a copy of a removal spell. Number 3, textbook tabulator, the 0/3 increment for 2 and a blue, and when it enters Surveil 2. It makes a lot of sense to me. Sealed is a slower format, so something that gives you a little card selection and can kind of grow into a threat, has time to be good in sealed and does not in draft. Number 4, chase inspiration, which we just talked about. This is one of the top cards, top commons in sealed. A very mediocre or not good card in draft. And again, it blinks a removal spell. It can protect your bomb. So it makes sense. And then finally, this one's actually new since last time. Muse's Encouragement, 4 and a blue for a 3/3 flyer that surveils 2 when it enters, essentially, at instant speed. And this makes a lot of sense. A 3/3 flyer for 5 is a category of card that is pretty much completely unplayable in contemporary draft, but that can still just kill someone if it's not answered. And in sealed, you often have more time to do that kind of thing. A flyer with 3 power that costs way too much, that's a very common category of card to be a lot better in sealed than in draft. Each of these cards is about 3 to 4 percentage points better in sealed than it is in draft in terms of game in hand win rate, the probability that you win given that you draw this card. All right, last thing before we talk about Golgari Get There, the list of the 5 commons that are the most worse in sealed compared to in draft. Very, very similar to last time. So this part of the format is very stable. 3 of the worst ones, Spirit Mascot, Pest Mascot, and Bogwater Lumerette, are 3 signpost commons, synergy intensive commons for Witherbloom and Lorehold. This makes perfect sense. I can pack a deck with 10 ways of removing cards from the graveyard or 10 ways of gaining life and make my Spirit Mascot or my Pest Mascot really good in draft. Well, maybe not really good, but at least a very functional role player in my deck. In sealed, you might never get to activate those synergies. So these are just understated creatures or hard to cast creatures for their stat line. And then 2 of the others are pump spells. Ancestral Anger makes a lot of sense because it is a extremely synergistic card. It gives a creature +X/+0, where X is 1 plus the number of cards named Ancestral Anger in your graveyard, and then you get to draw a card. If you do happen to open 8 Ancestral Angers in your sealed pool, it might be pretty good, but if you're just playing it as a one-of, you really shouldn't be. And then finally, Interjection, the +2/+2 and First Strike combat trick. So the 4 on the left are about 2 percentage points worse in sealed than in draft. Bogwater Lumerette, the biggest mover down of the bunch, is 3 percentage points worse in sealed than in draft. All right, so now we know what's good in the format and what's worse in the format. What if we end up in a spot where we feel like we kind of have to do one of the things that's worse? So after seeing the color pair power rankings, with Silver Quill down to Quandrix occupying the 55% to 57% win rate spread, you would be pretty sad if you ended up in Witherbloom, a full 2 percentage points lower in its average win rate than the next worst color pair. So if your pool pushes you towards Witherbloom instead of towards Silver Quill, you're already starting out at a 4 percentage point disadvantage. You would expect to lose 4% of the games that you would win if you were in Silver Quill instead of in Witherbloom. So if you do find yourself in Witherbloom, I want to teach you how to build an archetype that I've had a lot of success with that I am calling Golgari Get There, because sometimes it just gets there. So I'm basing this off of about half a dozen decks that I have won boxes with very underpowered looking Golgari decks that played a lot of cards that, according to the data, were frankly very bad. I've broken down what those decks did successfully, and I think at the core of it is a very functional game plan. The goal is to ask a question of your opponent every turn. And by ask a question, I mean you are putting something out there that they are eventually going to have to answer one way or another. You're not just sitting on your hands, you are presenting threat after threat after threat, even if they're not the most high quality bomby threats in the set. Okay, so I'm going to show you a bunch of examples of Golgari Get There decks, and then we're going to break down what they have in common that worked. First, it's worth asking, when should I even consider playing Golgari Get There? And I would say you should consider playing this I would say two situations. Number one, if there's just nothing else in your pool, like you really just have absolutely no direction, Golgari Get There can be a pretty good fallback plan. I've used it in pools where I thought, you know what, there's absolutely nothing good here, but this Golgari deck could possibly just get there. The other, of course, is if you open a bunch of Golgari bombs and you want to figure out what shell you should put them in. If you open Professor Delian Fell, which is a planeswalker that is green and black, it's a mythic, and it's one of the most powerful cards in draft, but also especially in sealed Secrets of Strixhaven. I'm definitely not saying, oh, Golgari is like on the bottom in terms of the color pair power rankings, so you should just leave your 2 copies of Delian Fell on the sideboard and go play some Prismari deck or something. I'm not saying that. If you open multiple copies of Delian Fell, you're going to want to figure out how to put them in your deck probably. So Golgari Get There gives you a framework for thinking of what kind of a deck you want to put them in. Other really good pulls into Golgari, Germination Practicum turns out to be very, very strong in this format. This is the 3/2 green paradigm card that puts 2+1/+1 counters on each creature you control. It just turns every single creature into a lethal threat very quickly. Slumbering Trudge is really good. This essentially 6/6 for 1. It sometimes enters with some stun counters. I mean, it's more like a 6/6 for 4. Postmortem Professor is super, super good. The 2/2 for 2, when it attacks, you drain the opponent for 1, and you can exile an instant or sorcery from your graveyard to bring this guy back to the battlefield. Another really good black or green card that's especially good in black-green is Moseo, the 2/1 for 2 and a black for a flyer, that when it enters, you make a 1/1 pest that when it attacks gains you a life. And then at the beginning of your end step, if you gained life, you can recur something from your graveyard. These are all bombs that I would say make you really want to be in something near the Golgari space if possible. I mean, Slumbering Trudge is more flexible, but the others are probably pushing you substantially towards a green-black, pretty assertive space. Okay, so like I've said, I'm weirdly a bit of a Golgari specialist in winning boxes. For some reason, like half of my box winning decks have been in Golgari, and they've looked pretty bad to me at the outset. So I want to break down what those decks actually did successfully. I'm going to talk a little bit about cards from past formats, but I'll make sure to explain everything. So don't worry if the cards look unfamiliar to you. The first deck that made me ever think, wow, this Golgari deck is terrible, but it's somehow winning, was a deck from Avatar: The Last Airbender, where honestly, the absolute core of the deck was triple Earth Rumble Wrestlers, which is a 3/4 for 4 reach that sometimes gets +1/+0. So it's a 3/4 for 4 that's sometimes a 4/4 for 4. I was also playing a Earth Kingdom General and a Diligent Zookeeper, which are both more or less 4/4 for 4s. And then I had an Uncle Iroh that was a 4/2 for 3. And then I had some 4/4s for 5 and a 6/6 for 6. So essentially this deck, while it did have some bombs, I mean, Day of Black Sun, Earthbender Ascension, and Azula are all some of the strongest cards in the format for sealed. Nevertheless, the main point of this deck was just as quickly as possible, put something with 4 power onto the battlefield, and then replace that card. So if you have a removal spell, for my first Earth Rumble Wrestlers, there are 2 more Earth Rumble Wrestlers where that came from, not to mention a bunch of other 4/4s that I can play for 4 or 5 mana. Earth Rumble Wrestlers, to be clear, was one of the worst cards in the not just draft format, but probably also in the sealed format. On average, its performance was terrible. But it seemed to work really well to put these guys together in a package with a bunch of their clunky 4-power friends. And this deck managed to go 7/1 and win me a box. I had a very, very similar experience in Ninja Turtles. Here, instead of a bunch of 4/4s for 4, I had a very, very strong top end. I had 4 bombs for 6 or 7 plus mana, or really, let's say 4 bombs for 5 plus mana, and a few slightly worse cards. Some of these are cards that will just completely take over the game the moment that you play them. And I won't go into too many details, partly out of respect for people who don't want to know about Ninja Turtles cards, which I totally respect. And then at 4 mana, I had a whole bunch of removal, 4 mana and also 3 mana. And by the way, in this deck, I would consider discard effects to be a kind of removal. A very common kind of card that is a lot better in sealed than it is in draft is any black card that makes the opponent discard 2 cards. Often black has a common that's like 3 mana, target player discards 2 cards. That is often one of the biggest movers up from draft to sealed. And it's partly because it will often just remove a bomb from your opponent's hand when it's sitting in their hand and they can't play it because people's mana is often a lot worse in sealed. So anyways, this card had, 5, 6, 7 plus cards that will just kill you if you don't answer them, paired with a whole bunch of removal, which is a good way of thinking about the Avatar deck too. It has, 5, 6, 7 different things that can kill you if you don't answer them. It also has double allies at last, Swamp Snare Trap, Dave Black Sun, etc., etc. It has like 5, 6 different pieces of removal. So Golgari Get There, we're already beginning to see, it pairs asking the questions by playing a bunch of big creatures that are not necessarily the best ones. So the green Timmy Stompy feature with black's high quality removal. So you're asking a question and then you're also answering the questions that your opponent asks. So that Ninja Turtles ramp deck also won me a box, 7-1 by the skin of my teeth. 2 boxes, sorry. Both of these actually won me 2 boxes. Another deck that won me 2 boxes was this Bloomborough Golgari deck. And by the way, it fits the same pattern. So Bloomborough overall has a lower curve. So you don't see so many like 6 or 7 drops in Bloomborough. But I did have one 6-drop, the Galewind Moose. I had one of those famous 3/3s for 5 that we're talking about, Glide Dive Duo, which I think is good in sealed. And by the way, there's a functional reprint of it in Secrets of Strixhaven. The Sneering Shade Rider is exactly the same card with different creature types. 3/3 for 5 when it enters drain 2 flying. This card can just kill someone, and regardless of the set, regardless of the power level, people still have 20 HP. So a 3/3 flyer that drains for 2 still represents something that the opponent just has to do something about. And then I just had a whole bunch of creatures with 3 power, cards that would just take over the game, and also a whole bunch of removal. So it's very easy for the opponent to remove my Camellia, my Trigger Duo, my Glide Dive Duo, my Galewind Moose in a vacuum. But if I'm playing one every single turn, it really adds up. A well-constructed deck can certainly deal with this kind of just asking a question every turn, but not every deck that you play against in sealed is going to be both well-constructed and draw well. And so Golgari Get There lives in the space where you can just kind of win a lot of games by default. I play a 4/4 for 4, 3/4 for 4, whatever. And if you don't have an answer to it, that's already, a 7-turn clock from a starting life total. And if I have 6, 7 plus of those in my deck, I'm hopefully going to just start playing one of those every turn pretty much after turn 4. I want to also show you the first deck that I ever won a box with. Actually, the first deck I ever played with in an Arenadirect. This is from Tarkir Dragonstorm. It was a 3-color deck, so it was Sultai. And I did have 2 of the best bombs in that format, Meringue River Region and Ugin, so that was a big part of why I won. But at the same time, it is kind of a Golgari Get There deck. It's playing 4 different 3/3 flyers for 5. So a bunch of green dragons that can just kill an opponent if they're not answered. And then, by the way, also a 3/3 flyer for 4, and then a bunch of 3/3s for 3. So I have basically 6 cards that have higher stats than your white weenie deck is going to put together, and they eventually just need to get answered. And then I also have a whole bunch of removal. I mean, all of these exhales, this is basically 4 removal spells, plus a Dragon's Prey, and so on. I'm basically pairing 6, 7, 8 cards that can kill you with half a dozen plus removal spells. And not all of them are the best cards in the format. Again, I mean, Gurmag Nightwatch, Avenger of the Fallen, Snowmelt Stag, each of these had pretty bad stats in the format. Unrooted Ancestor, actually. A bunch of these had pretty darn bad stats in the format, but the threat density of each of them together makes for a consistent kind of 1-2 punch. Okay, the one deck that I've so far won a box with in Secrets of Strixhaven was not technically Golgari Get There, but it was very similar in spirit. So I want to draw an analogy between one of my cards of the format, Hungry Graphalon, and the Earth Rumble Wrestlers. Earth Rumble Wrestlers, 3/4 for 4 reach, that sometimes gets +1/+0 and becomes a 4/4. Hungry Graphalon, a 3/4 for 4 reach that has increment, so it sometimes gets bigger. Both of these are super awkward, understated green 4-drops. In draft, they will just eat a removal spell, and you'll be very sad that you played them much of the time. In sealed, I'm very sorry to say for my fellow giraffe lovers, Hungry Graphalon is the lowest win rate card in green-black by a mile. It is 3 percentage points below the next lowest card in green-black by win rate, and it is 5 percentage points below the next lowest card after that. So you are taking a big hit to your expected win rate the instant that you draw a Hungry Graphalon. But I had 2 of them in my deck, and the second worst card supposedly is Wild Hypothesis, and guess what? I had 2 of those in my deck too. I don't want to overlearn the lessons of this one event because I did get quite lucky. If you look back at this run, which I posted online, everyone was getting mana screwed against me. But that's the kind of situation in which Golgari Get There gets there. I play a Hungry Graphalon on 4. Now you're looking at a 3/4. Say you're stuck on your second or your third color and you can't really play much. Now on turn 5, I play a Wild Hypothesis. These are 2 terrible cards if you're on a Prismari deck that has efficient removal and efficient card draw, and you're able to just get rid of it, find your removal, get rid of it, and get card advantage while doing so, then I'm almost certainly on a track to lose. But if you're mana screwed, now you're staring down a Hungry Graphalon that just incremented up to 4 power, and a Wild Hypothesis for 4, so I have 8 power staring you down on turn 5, and you're going to need to find something in a hurry because you're probably dead now in 2 turns, right? You do not have that many draws to get unmana screwed any longer. So I wouldn't want to be in this position. This deck was incredibly weird, but I think playing Hungry Graphalons and Wild Hypothesis was a very nice way to put threats into a pool that did not have that many threats. And then I also splashed around a bunch in order to get enough removal. So Arcane Omens, the discard spell, is certainly removal. Archaic's Agony is removal that I put on the splash, as well as 2 Unsubtle Mockeries. Germination Practicum, this was a pull into green. It's one it turns out to be, and I kind of suspected at the time that it probably would be, one of the top mythics in the format. I also splashed for a Prismatic Ending just to get a little bit more removal in there. And honestly, the Elite Interceptors should be understood as kind of removal. Not really, I mean, you should take that with a grain of salt, but they are a way of pushing a little bit more Graphalon damage so that it makes it a little bit harder for your opponent to answer the question that you asked. So once again, this is pretty much in the flavor of Golgari Get There. It's a deck that asks, I would say maybe about, let's say, 6 questions consistently, about 6 cards that are just going to come down as beaters most of the time, even if they're not the most efficient ones. And then it has also about half a dozen plus removal spells. I've actually been very successful with this archetype compared to other archetypes, so it was hard for me to find examples of Golgari didn't get there, but I kind of have one from actually a video that I posted a while back. This was more Quandrix, but I want to point out what it did not do that all the Golgari Get There examples that won boxes did. This, on paper, might look like a better deck. It has double Wander Off, Grapple with Death, and double Run Behind, so the removal is on point. It has really good card draw, Mind into Matter, Embrace the Paradox. It has a Traumatic Critique, a fantastic card, Quick Study, one of the best commons, Paradox Surveyor to smooth out the lands, plus triple Studious First Year, and then Slumbering Charge and Ambitious Augmenter, 2 of the top green rares. But what it doesn't have is a threat density. How many cards here have 3 or more power when they come down? Pestbrood Sloth, Paradox Surveyor, Slumbering Trudge. 3 threats. So honestly, going back in time, I don't know if this was there in the pool, but I would want to get like 3, 4, 5 terrible green commons in here. Just get a bunch of stats into this deck. And this deck that went 4-2 might have been able to win me a box just by asking a lot more questions. So now that we've seen these examples, let's write down the rules for Golgari Get There. The first and most important thing, I think you want at least 7 lethal threats. I would say as many potentially lethal threats as you can get there. And by lethal, I mean ideally 4 power or more, even if it's overcosted, even if it doesn't have a lot of impact beyond that. Literally a vanilla 4/4/4 is a card I would play in Golgari Get There. It might be the worst card in the set by stats. Golgari Get There is its true home. So these can be bad cards. That's fine. Just prioritize when you're doing Golgari Get There, getting potentially lethal threats in your deck over having every card in your deck have a high win rate. You also must have a lot of removal. The idea is I'm going to play a card that has 4 power. If you play a 5/5, I need to be able to attack. I need to be able to get my threat through. The advantage of Golgari Get There is pairing the green stats with the black removal. With very rare exceptions, I would say every card in Golgari Get There should affect the board. You're either playing a creature or you're removing a creature. My Golgari Didn't Get There deck, that had so much card draw, some card selection, some ramp that was not attached to a creature. The difference between studious first tier and shared roots is really important here, I think. If you're playing any card that does not affect the board in Golgari Get There, you're giving up the core advantage of your deck. So maybe sometimes it's correct if you have a really powerful one like Germination Practicum, you could argue doesn't affect the board unless you already have a board, but in Golgari Get There, if you don't have a board, you're losing anyways. So I would say really any card that you play should be affecting the board. Ideally, I would want to be using these other slots on, well, the bombs that make me feel like I should be playing Golgari in the first place. And also, ramp is really nice. The difference between a 4/4 for 5 that comes down on turn 5 and a 4/4 for 5 that comes down on turn 4, that can absolutely be the difference between winning and losing against an opponent who can generate tons of card advantage. I think the one exception to the whole affect the board thing is discard effects seem to be very good in Golgari Get There, but I would argue those are basically just slow removal spells a lot of the time in sealed. That's probably why they're good. If you're playing target player discards 2 cards, it's good in situations where removal would be good. But I think the biggest mistake you could make is if you're trying to play like bad draw spells. Like, I don't know, 1 mana sacrifice a creature, draw 2 is a card that we've seen a few times. That would be a perfect example of a card to not play in Golgari Get There. Because if you're taking away from your board or not adding to your board, you're going to fall behind, and your card advantage is going to be worse than most of your opponent's card advantage. So while we are affecting the board, we are avoiding just worse card advantage than our opponent's going to have. We do not want to trade win rate for impact, or we don't want to trade impact away to get higher win rate in our deck. So you're okay in Golgari Get There playing the worst cards in the format if they are impactful on the board. And finally, stats really matter. 1/1 for 1 is not a good stat line unless it's also a bomb like the Ambitious Augmenter or ramp like Studious First Tier that is going to meaningfully affect your board presence or the speed at which you can get stats down. You really do not want to be playing a lot of 2/2s for 2. You should really be focusing on the 4+ part of your curve and playing those cards out as quickly as possible. And then especially playing as many of them as possible. So I came up with a tagline for Golgari Get There because I don't want everyone to go into this event thinking, oh, I can't wait to play Golgari Get There. Here's the bumper sticker. Golgari Get There is the best of a bad situation. If I'm in the situation where I have to play the worst deck, this is how to make the best version of that deck to have the best chance possible of winning a box. All right, I always close with this general advice, which I think cannot be said enough. If you feel like you're getting something out of this content, also make sure that you're subscribed to my channel on YouTube. I do post a new data deep dive video just like this one at least once a week. And other than that, a new draft gameplay video most days. So in this weekend's event, to have the best chance possible of winning a box, number 1, make sure that you start out with a budget. Don't just splurge in the moment, especially to recover from a bad run. You want to make sure that you know in advance how many gems you're going to spend and stick to that amount. Make sure to eat, rest, and take your breaks. Don't just roll out of bed without eating anything and jam a bunch of arenadirect games in a row. It's probably not going to go very well for you. Make sure that you are using your timer in these games. Think through your plays. There's no reason to be making quick decisions that you're going to regret when you have a full minute plus to make most of your game decisions. And finally, feel free to join our Discord. You can do that in the link in the description below or in my channel description. And in the Discord, we have an entire channel where people go post their pools and ask for help constructing them. So best of luck winning a box, and until tomorrow, have tons of fun playing Magic, and don't be afraid to splash.